All right, guys, welcome to the Sabby Sab Show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I have a special guest with me tonight. His name is Ryan, and he's a part of the United Front Against Displacement. Ryan, welcome, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sabby. Really glad to be here.
So one of the questions I have for you, can you please explain to everyone what is United Front Against Displacement about, also known as UFAD?
Yeah, so we're a tenant organization, basically fighting against gentrification and displacement. We're based out of New York City, Boston, the San Francisco Bay Area. We have a little chapter in Amherst, Massachusetts, and also in Houston. So we're something of a national organization, although modest in our efforts. And one of the main things we're involved in is the fight against the privatization of public housing in New York City and around the country.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. For those who are not aware, he mentioned there's a Boston chapter. So I did meet some of them about a month or so ago. We're having the same problem here in Boston where people are just being displaced because you have some of the mayors that are allowing like developers and investors to come in and to buy up public housing. And so they sell those buildings to those developers. They let them get them. And then the developers will they turn them into like condos or like luxury apartments, something that they can make a lot more money off of. So it's happening across the United States. But the question remains, what happens to those residents that are from the public housing? Like, where do they go? In reference to New York City, what is happening to those residents that are being displaced?
Yeah, well, New York City has the largest concentration of public housing in the country. There's estimates vary because there are people who aren't on the leases, which is common in the projects. Family members come to stay and so on. It's around 600,000 people probably. And when these privatizations happen, tenants are promised the world. They're told sign on the dotted line, move out, and then you'll come back to a brand new apartment, stainless steel appliances, and the works. And on average, with these privatizations, only a quarter of people ever get to return, based on studies that have been done about prior programs and this one as well. The current CEO of NYCHA, who gets paid $400,000 a year, Greg Russ, he oversaw the privatizations of public housing in Chicago, also in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and elsewhere. In Chicago, I think the total is about 40,000 residents are still waiting to come back. And there was a recent article where their projects were demolished and they were sold to a Major League Soccer team, the land, where they've built new practice facilities. It's loot and plunder on an epic scale, and it's hardly being covered at all in the mainstream media, which I guess isn't surprising, but given how bad the media is right now in this country. But people end up homeless. People are moving down south. They're moving in with relatives. In San Francisco, where we organize, this is where privatization has basically been complete. It's not a coincidence that's one of the cities with one of the worst homelessness crises in the country, because once housing goes, that's the floor for rent. Once that's pulled, things keep going up and up across the board as far as rents go.
No, it's true. This is such a bad. It's a common problem. I do want to show a clip here. I want people to see this. Now, this is from one of the protests that happened recently. Let me go ahead and share my screen here, because I know that you guys have been fighting back against this. We need these things to happen. And this is something where I tell everyone, like, electoral politics is not fixing this type of issue. So let me go ahead and play this really quick for you. So it says, stop Eric Adams' privatization of NYCHA, protest at New York City Hall. And this was July 14th this year.
This is supposed to be a country, a civilization of higher education, of advanced knowledge, advanced education, a country of so-called civilization. Am I right or wrong? That's what they teach us in school, from childhood. This is the best country in the world. You can't find a country better than this. This is the most civilized country in the world, the most advanced country in the world. Nobody has an educational system better than we do. All of you, including me, that went to these fancy colleges and universities, well, guess what? We've all been brainwashed and hypnotized and indoctrinated and programmed to believe a lot of BS in the guise of education. But let me ask you this. If it's truly, honestly, and sincerely a country, a civilization, a society of higher learning, of so-called civilization, Since when does a country like this do these things to its citizens? So in other words, this is a country of fraud, of lies, illusions, deceptions. We were told that this country is about a democracy. It's supposed to be a democratic system. But when this stuff like this is going on to the elderly, not just here in New York City, but in other states and across the country, and even in other countries, I understand that they're doing this kind of gentrification, privatization.
Quick question, Ryan, and now finish the video. He mentioned something that I think some people may not be aware of, is that there are also elderly people that live in these buildings as well. I just talked to someone recently here in Boston that told me that there are also people who are on disability that are living in some of these buildings. So these are people who are on fixed incomes being pushed out of, Section 8 housing, public housing, and basically being told, okay, you have to find somewhere else to live. They're on a fixed income.
Yeah, it's absurd. I mean, and Paul, who's speaking there, he's lived at Manhattanville projects, I think almost 60 years in West Harlem. And that's one of the projects being privatized. A majority of people in our organization, our chapter in Harlem, are seniors, actually. And they're fighting for their lives because they're targeted, they're preyed upon by the housing authority in particular. I mean, it's disgusting what's happening. And there's no remorse shown by these housing authorities who are literally just selling the land out from underneath people to bring in private developers. As I said, it's brutal. And housing itself, it's set at 30% of people's income. So if their income drops, then their rent drops, which is expensive even compared to what it used to be in housing, but still is way less than market rate. Market rate for a 2-bedroom right now in New York City, I think is over $3,000.
Yep.
It's impossible for most people in housing to go and pay that.
And let's all remember too, we just entered a recession as well. So it's going to be twice as hard for them to find housing. Like, you have to come up with the money. I don't know how much it is in New York, or how many months you have to come up with, but most places here in the Boston area, they want 3 months up front, at least.
Yeah, so it's the same thing here. Although I note the White House and the Biden administration is still in denial about us being in a recession, changing the very definition. So we have they seem to think if they play with words, they can pretend the situation's better. But spending time in the projects, in the poor areas of New York City, people know what's going on. They see it every day with their pay increasingly under threat as people are losing their jobs and inflation going through the roof. So the White House can play their games, but the reality, people see it.
Yeah.
So we have to come to the senses and realize, this is all a scam. This is a lie. This is bullshit. So what we got to do now, we got to develop some strategies to counteract it. That's what we have to do. It's inevitable, because if you don't do something, there's going to be too much homelessness spread across not just New York City, but across the country and across the world.
We know we won't get the real deal with any federal administration, but the more we work together, the more resilient we could be against the long road ahead, fighting for political, economic systems change, both domestically and with fellow strugglers overseas as well. I can go on, but we need to bring on board more folks to the fight of organizing NYCHA residents until we tank this immoral and unethical plan. Always remember that there's something to talk about when it comes to keeping private companies away. We need to fight their greed in nearby neighborhoods and make sure that our friends and family elsewhere know that privatization isn't their saving grace as well. We are the saving grace we are looking for, each other.
If it happens to go through, God forbid, that they succeed in corporatizing all the NYCHA houses around the city and across the country, where do you think you're going to go? You're going to be homeless, walking back and forth from city to city, from state to state. What do you think they're going to do to you? They got plans for you. They're going to corral you up and put you in concentration camps, just like in the futuristic movies. That's what they're going for. That's what they're going for. So these so-called institutes of higher learning, this so-called society of higher civilization, is really BS. There is no civil liberties when you do something like this. There is no constitutional rights for the individuals when you do this kind of stuff, when you You allow corporations to strip people of their homes and their land and their personal belongings and personal freedom. It's a bunch of hogwash. It's a bunch of nonsense. So I just say that to say that we've all been duped, we've all been lied to, we've all been programmed and hypnotized. So a society like this is not really a democratic society. When you see stuff like this going on, you gotta take a step back and realize, this is all been a lie ever since I was born here in this society, ever since I was raised in the so-called civilized society. This is a lie. With these devils, you cannot sleep, you cannot rest, you cannot relax. So this is a war. We are at war. This is a battle. Any way you look at it, it's a battle.
Don't take this laying down, guys. Let's stand up for what we want, what we need. We need change too. And we don't have bigger people that's on our side. It's us. It's us. It's no Al Sharpton. There's no Jesse Jackson. It's none of these people. It's us. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what race you are. You're human, just like I am. And what they're going to do to one housing project, they're going to do it for nothing. And on. Fight, guys. Fight for us all, not just for one, but for all. Fight for all.
Harlem has been greatly gentrified from what I understand, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they even recently tried to rebrand South Harlem as Soha to make it more acceptable to bougie people. So it doesn't sound like Harlem. It's like Soho, Soha. But thankfully, at least people were quite outraged about that. They've backed off that. But the gentrification accelerates. And right near Manhattanville projects, there's Columbia University. And they are one of the biggest forces of gentrification in the area, expanding their campus, trying to, I think they accepted 500 new undergrads this year. They don't have the dorm space for them. So they have plans, much like Northeastern in Boston, to push to Harlem, like Northeastern's pushing into Roxbury. And people, for example, I know in Boston at the Lenox Street projects have just been privatized. And they're very worried that they're going to end up under Northeastern's purview. The same thing's going on at Manhattanville, at Grant Houses, which is right near Manhattanville, right next to Columbia.
One thing I'll tell you guys too about Northeastern, for those who are not aware, I went to Northeastern and I worked at Northeastern. They also, this is ridiculous I'm saying this, but did you guys know that they didn't want Northeastern to technically be in Roxbury, even though that is Roxbury? So they redrew the lines because they were afraid that it would hurt admission if they told people it was in the Roxbury neighborhood in Boston. I remember when I was there in grad school, they bought the YMCA and just took that down to create more dorms. So they have been buying up housing in the Roxbury neighborhood for the university. I don't know where the people go. Like after that, they're gone. Like they're just pushed out basically. And I don't know where they end up. But this has been a big problem with these universities, mainly the private universities, buying up property that really belongs to the people and pushing the residents out just so they can expand the campus.
Yeah. And I'm actually from Boston originally. And for where people go, I used to work at a call center in Boston. And one of my friends there, she was from Codman Square originally. And her mom, they were forced to move out to Brockton because they couldn't even afford Codman Square anymore. Now it's a little bit away from Northeastern, but Brockton, Randolph, Fall River, further and further. That's where people are going. And it speaks to what Paul was talking about at the beginning of that video, which is that there's not really democracy. We have formal democracy. We get to pick from a handful of candidates, most of them bad and not so different. But as far as the corporate agenda, we don't get to vote on that. There's no candidates who are really going against the status quo when it comes to gentrification. And
that's right. No, I'm glad you said that because that's a big one. Like for me, and I was going to ask in reference to Eric Adams, where has he been on this issue?
Eric Adams, much like de Blasio, Bloomberg before them, it's continuity, one administration to the next, different branding to some extent, but Adams is very pro-developer. As a former cop, it's not surprising he's that. But he's gone around the city and gone to all the developments that are being privatized or slated to be privatized and done these press conferences supporting it. And actually, in Brooklyn, he was at a project the other day, and someone threw a can at him out the window, one that had just been privatized. He was talking about how great it was, and people were so mad listening to him speak, they threw something at him out the window. Didn't hit him, but it shows how people really feel about it, even if sometimes there isn't as much resistance as there needs to be.
Yeah, and this is something that has been, I would say, slowly happening over the past 20 years in reference to gentrification, because I still remember when I did live in New York, this was many years ago, I remember Williamsburg used to actually be like a European working class neighborhood. And the last time I went to New York, Williamsburg is heavily gentrified. It's mainly a playground for professionals. It's nothing like how it used to be. Like they just took over the neighborhood. And so it's really sad. It's happening all across this country, by the way. I'm sure you guys now have tent communities in New York as well. I know Eric Adams was trying to push the tent communities out, but I mean, they just relocate to another area. I mean, what do you do with this happening across the country? Austin, Texas has tent communities now. So it's not just happening on like the East and the West Coast.
Yeah. The project I was referring to where the can was thrown was actually in Williamsburg, one of the last few areas where people could afford to live. And now that that's privatized, people are moving out. One of the tenants from there, he's a Hasidic Jew. I was just talking to him. He moved down to Arizona. You know, that's where he went after his building was privatized. And it's hard for the Hasidim because they have their whole community. And when that gets broken up, it's very difficult for anyone, but especially for religious people often, you know. And it's an all-out attack that's being waged. As for where people go, you know, they have no plan. The shelter system is so bad in New York City that many homeless people sleep on the subway or in tents. And now they're being harassed far more by the police under Eric Adams. I mean, in San Francisco, they've been pushing all sorts of new repressive laws for the homeless, like the stewardship law that allows them to, even if you haven't committed a crime, detain you under mental health reasons and put you in an institute and so on. So it's quite disturbing the way it's going. And again, to refer to the speech that Paul was giving, just what does it tell us about our society if this is what's happening to people here who can't afford to pay the market rent?
That's right. And another thing I've noticed as well, you know, people having to move to Arizona, it's just moving costs money, right? So for people who are asking like, well, they could just go somewhere else. It's not that simple. I was talking to Pastor John Wheeler here in Boston at Bromley Heath. So the Boston chapter, actually, they were at that event where Mayor Wu was there, and he was talking about what's happening at Bromley Heath. Similar situation. The building has been sold to developers. The community center also has been sold to developers, and that's actually a historic building. Black Panther actually started that community center. They don't care. They just want the money. But Pastor John Wheeler was explaining to me that it's not just about the building, it's the community. So he has a daughter, his daughter is special needs. And he said it took him years to teach her how to go from their building to her appointments. He said it took years to teach that. Now they're telling them, well, when we, you know, take over this building, you guys can relocate to South Boston. For people who are not aware, South Boston is not next to Jamaica Plain. It's a completely different environment, a different neighborhood. So he's like, then he would have to teach her all over again. So it's about community as well. It's just not about the fact that a company is coming in and taking over the building.
Yeah, and this relates to a long-standing policy by HUD, Housing and Urban Development, the department of the government, which oversees the local public housing authorities. Since the 60s, in the wake of the civil rights, and in particular the Black Power movement, they've pursued I think, very racist policy called the deconcentration of poverty, which was aimed in particular at attacking Black and Latino communities, which were seen correctly as centers of rebellion, breaking them up, destroying the social bonds that hold people together. And this was then tied in with the war on drugs and proliferation of mass incarceration. And we see this today. And it's spewed through the racist myth, too, that, oh, if people get out of the culture of poverty, then see some wealthy people around them, and they'll move up socially too. A total negation of dealing with the basic problems of capitalism and structural unemployment and racial discrimination that are baked into the system.
Right. And because when those neighborhoods become gentrified, everything else in those neighborhoods increase because they know that the professionals are going to pay more for rent.
Yeah.
So they drive the rent prices up. They bring in these juice bars and these little spin cycle like gyms and things like that. Like those things are expensive. So the people who grew up there, they can't afford to go to those juice bars. They can't afford to go to the new cool gym. They just can't afford it. And so it becomes unlivable for them. It's really disgusting. I was talking to Professor Wolf about this last year, and he was explaining to me that he feels this actually started in Detroit when they took the auto industry out and sent those jobs overseas. That's when gentrification, in his opinion, actually started, because the people, you get rid of the jobs, what happens? You know, then people don't have jobs. So poverty increases, then the crime increases. And so then they feel like the way to fix it is to bring in professionals. So the professionals come in and then they drive the price of everything else up. And so the people, the neighborhood has improved now, but the people who grew up there can't afford to live there and enjoy those improvements.
Yeah. And then they'll keep one or two of the original businesses around, maybe under new management, and have a little like, oh, look at the diversity of our neighborhood type places. I mean, you see it in Jamaica Plain now in Boston, where over the last, look at Hyde Square now compared to 10 years ago. It's very different. And I was going to say the other thing is, with this whole gentrification push, the biggest myth they promote is the idea there's not enough housing. You know, if you look at the government statistics, there's 17 million empty houses.
Yep.
And then I don't know the exact numbers, but I've seen studies in New York City, 40,000, 100,000 vacant apartments that are being warehoused, kept off the market by landlords and banks who hold these onto these as investment vehicles to restrict the supply of housing, ensure that demand is greater than supply, and drive up the rents, and therefore drive up the value of their properties. And it's well known amongst the policymaking circles, but the money's in building and gentrification and not enforcing the wealthy to rent out the vacant apartments that they hold.
Now, I wonder too, I'm curious, how are they allowed, because this was one part I didn't get to ask, how are they allowed to purchase HUD housing though?
Yeah. So HUD is governed in particular by the Housing Act of 1937 that was set up as part of the New Deal. Now, people are generally familiar with Section 8 as the Section 8 vouchers. The public housing is under Section 9 of that Housing Act, but Section 18 contains the information and the rules under which public housing authorities such as Boston Housing Authority, NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, can sell off their property. And basically, there's very little in terms of regulations around it. It's minimal. And what they do is they give a 99-year ground lease often to the company that's taking over. And the company owns the buildings, and then NYCHA or BHA or whoever owns the land sometimes. But those are flexible and subject to change. And 99-year lease means everyone living there now will be dead before that lease ends, in almost all certainty. So basically, there's a series of different programs also that have been created at the federal level to oversee the privatization. Under Clinton, there was a series of programs called HOPE, morbidly called HOPE, that were all privatization programs. Orchard Park in Boston was done through this, which was a disaster for those who were here. And then eventually after HOPE 6, it became so unpopular that they kind of created a new branding for it, which was called RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration. Obama created that, which was a new aggressive push for privatization. And now even RAD is gone because that's become unpopular and because it's more profitable to do in other ways. And so now there's a series of different programs that are being pursued, but basically there's very little they have to do to hand the land over and the buildings over to private companies. And their justification is that there's not enough funding. So they need to switch over from public housing to Section 8 housing.
Right.
Now, actually, on a per unit basis, shifting to Section 8 is almost 3 times as expensive for the government. So it's not about being unwilling to spend the money. It's just through the Section 8 program, that money goes directly into private hands of the corporations who take over the projects. Whereas when it's given out to the housing authority, there's something of a greater difficulty in immediately handing that over to private companies to subsidize them.
Something Greg said here I want to highlight because I think this is important. He said the tech industry should be deconcentrated. Tell Facebook to set up shop out in the Berkshires instead of Cambridge. So this is a big problem. Part of the reason why you have so many professionals moving to those cities and those neighborhoods like Roxbury, like Williamsburg, is because you have companies like Facebook, Google, a lot of these tech companies, they set up shop there, right? They're not located in these rural communities. They're usually on the coast where you have these coastal elite universities. So they kind of feed each other. They go to the places where there is the Harvard, the Columbia, the NYU students, and then they feed them into those tech companies. But if Facebook and Google and Apple, all the other tech companies, if they were to set up shop in rural America, then that could possibly prevent some of those tech professionals from moving to those cities and gentrifying those neighborhoods. But those companies don't want to do that. That's a big part of the problem. I know, at least in Boston, that's why a lot of them are here. A lot of the tech professionals are here because this is where those jobs are, or they're on the West Coast, or they're not out in rural America. So that is something I think that really needs to change.
And when I was living in Boston, I don't know if it still is the case, but I remember Cambridge was the most expensive commercial real estate in the country because of all that tech and biotech stuff around MIT and Harvard. I mean, it's absurd how much it costs there.
Yeah, it really is, because for people who don't know, MIT there's a lot of companies in Cambridge that are affiliated with MIT. And you may not know that unless you ask someone. It just looks like a separate tech company, but a lot of times those are startups that were started by somebody at MIT. And so they have this affiliation. And yeah, it drives the price up. It's crazy. Like, people can't afford to live there. I know professionals that are having a difficult time trying to live in Cambridge or Boston. I don't know anyone that doesn't have a roommate of some sorts, multiple roommates, but it's gotten progressively worse over the past 10 years. I've been here for almost 11 years come this September. And I've seen the rents just continue to increase. They slowed down a little bit during the pandemic because people were starting to move out of the city when their jobs told them they could work remotely indefinitely. But those prices are coming back up. And like I said, like, you have to have, like, here, they want you to have 3 months rent up front. So they want first, last, and security, or they'll say first, last, and what's the other thing they do? Deposit. It's the same thing. It's 3 months rent. So if the rent is like $2,500, that means you have to have that times 3 up front. So for people being pushed out of these like Section 8 housing and public housing, they don't have 3 times the rent to just go live somewhere else.
Yeah. And I mean, you were talking earlier about Detroit and the plans of the businesses, the big businesses, corporations, to move jobs overseas, sometimes down south too, where there wasn't a history of unionization. And I mean, look at what they've done to people's lives, and they have no regard for it. Actually, they know what they're doing. They don't care, because their ability to maximize profit and control is so much greater. And it's well known, I think, that the official unemployment numbers are a total joke, because it only counts people who are actively collecting unemployment. Yep. The government has another statistic called the labor force participation rate, which measures, according to their definition, the percentage of able-bodied working age adults who are not full-time students, who work at least 1 hour a week. And the number is hovering somewhere around 60% right now. So it means 40% of the population isn't working 1 hour a week. And that gives you a sense of the structural unemployment that exists, even when they're talking about how great the labor market is and so on and so forth. So how are people supposed to get first class and security to get an apartment? How are they supposed to pack up and move? I mean, there's no plan. And the plan is for people to die. I mean, that's the real plan. Yep. Is, I think realistically, we could easily reorganize society to meet people's needs. But as far as the wealthy elite are concerned, there's overpopulation that they hope people die. And they don't have, and their actions show it, even if they won't say it openly, although some now are saying it openly.
Yeah, no, it's true. There's another clip here I want to play from another protest from your organization. So let me go ahead and share my screen here as well. Okay, and it says May 2022, rally against privatization at Manhattanville. And again, this is in Harlem. So here we go.
It's a privatization scam where they hand over control of housing to private companies, nonprofit entities, and the money behind it all is the big banks. They have a plan, along like wealthy universities like Columbia, to take over Harlem, to take over the parts of New York City they don't already control, to drive people out of their homes, and to turn this whole area into a playground for the rich.
Hi guys, I know y'all all know me. I got the biggest mouth. Okay? I'm gonna give you a little history about Manhattanville. Manhattanville been operational since 1961. I was a tenant and brought up in Manhattanville right here, 1420. Some of y'all been here as long as I have been. We should own these apartments. I don't care how raggedy they are, they're ours, they're our home. Section 8 is a waiting list. They're not gonna be able to give us Section 8 a year after we've been here. I can't wait. This is my home. We've seen a lot of generations amongst us, and once they break us apart and start sending us all different kind of places, we will never come back together. And you need to understand why we all need to be together. Not one against the other, not saying what you don't know, saying what you do know, and standing with it, fighting for it. Because if you don't, somebody else will.
Despite all the efforts by the rich and powerful in this country to make us feel powerless, we actually have a lot of power. We can come together, stand together arm in arm, and stop this.
St. Mary's is here to say that we stand with the residents of Manhattanville, because our experience is when rich people want something, they don't look at who's in the way. And we are not afraid to be here with you, to stand with you against whatever powers and principalities that face us.
I just want you all to know that a lot of Columbia students like myself are just as outraged by the university's actions, and we are here to listen to you and support you and stand behind you and fight with you. We can all oppose the harmful actions of Columbia together.
I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. And I don't want y'all to be afraid. Who's gonna care about us? We gotta care about ourselves, guys. Let's stick together. Let's get it together.
Word of mouth goes a long way, and especially when it comes to this. So you talk to your neighbor, you're in the elevator, yo, did you hear about the pack? Yo, y'all need to get on board. Y'all need to start talking to people. It's time to start talking. No, come on out, because this affects you too. I need y'all to come on out and support one another. And if you decide that your home is important to you, do the right thing. Come on out.
Wow, so much to be said there. I want to show everyone this map really quickly because I want you to see why Columbia University would be trying to buy buildings in Harlem. So you see here we have Columbia University. And if you look at the map here, scoot this over just a little bit for you guys. Here's Columbia University. And if let me zoom in a little bit. There we go. Here's Columbia University. And if you noticed, right over here is Harlem. That's how close Columbia University is to Harlem. Now, they don't like to say that there. They like to say we're in Uptown. And yes, Harlem is still part of Uptown, but it's that close. Similar situation with Northeastern University and Boston. So it's very close to it. And they see that as, oh, we can buy up buildings here and expand the campus. It's very sad. I feel like a lot of the history that was in Harlem is being lost. You have Marcus Garvey Park, so many, jazz musicians and writers and artists from Harlem. I feel like the history there is being lost. It's really sad.
Yeah, and if you see up at the top of the map, if you can move up a little bit, just a little further uptown, you can see the Columbia Business School. And basically right between Columbia's main campus there and the business school are two projects, Manhattanville and Grant Houses. And Columbia is already aggressively moving up them. I saw someone commented that they lived on West 135th and Broadway, right, probably across the street from Manhattanville, in this little area on the west side of Broadway there.
Right.
Now, Columbia just bought that all up and changed the name of that area to their Manhattanville campus, indicating their plans to move on Manhattanville, to create a corridor to the business school where students can go and travel and train to work in the CIA or go on to get a great job at the New York Times, being a lovely, conscientious Democratic Party voter, to be a bit facetious, and never have to encounter anyone from the projects, any poor people or anything. And
yep.
That's the dream Columbia has. I mean, for the short term, and then further expansion in the longer term or medium term.
They don't want them to rub elbows with poor people and working class people.
Yeah. Unless it's at a safe distance doing some charity work where you give someone a sandwich, you pat yourself on the back, you say, I'm so good and generous, and you go back to working at your Fortune 500 company or making a few $100,000 as a director of a nonprofit that's little more than kind of profiteering off poverty.
Exactly. And I'll show you guys another example as well. Let me bring my tab back here. I'll show you the same thing with Northeastern University. So you can see here as well. Let me try to zoom out just a little bit. Okay. So this is Northeastern University here in Boston. What they do, oh, I don't know why I did that. Okay, there we go. What they have done is basically this area right here where it says Fenway, they have basically said, we're going to say that Northeastern is in a neighborhood called the Fens. It really wasn't. Northeastern was in Roxbury. So if you go up further up on the map, this is still Northeastern University. There's Mass Ave. This street right here, I'm trying to see if they put, yeah, there's West Village. There's Ruggles. This was all Columbus Garage. That was all Roxbury. And they just didn't want, they said, well, the university cannot have that reputation. And you see the difference because as soon as you go from the Ruggles T-stop, which is a commuter rail station here and subway, as soon as you go over Tremont Street, what do you see? Sojourner Truth Court. And you're going to see a lot of names like that when you get to this area, because that's Roxbury, and Roxbury was, at the time, was a predominantly Black neighborhood. So it's just, and there's Roxbury Street. So they changed it. Like I said, they redrew the lines so that they can say that Northeastern University is not in Roxbury. But Northeastern has bought up so many buildings. They bought up residential buildings. They bought up apartment buildings. They bought the YMCA. There used to be a YMCA over here, and they turned that into dorms. So this is why I've told you guys this before. Having worked in higher ed, these universities are all about business. They don't care. They don't care that poor people get pushed out. Nobody cares about the poor.
Yeah. And quite disturbingly, in a sense, Northeastern has a Voices of Roxbury project, right? Where they kind of like, oh, look at all the historic voices of Black people in Roxbury, at the same time that they're destroying Roxbury. I mean, right across from the Ruggles station, the Ruggles Street projects, they were privatized. Right across Tremont, between Tremont and Washington, there's the Lenox Street projects and the Camden projects. Those are both just privatized. Bank of America is now the 99% owner of the Lenox Street projects. and Northeastern is looking to move in there in the not so distant future, given the luxury dorms they've built on the other side of Tremont. I mean, it's disgusting. And then what sort of education are people getting at these universities when they're promoting that sort of stuff?
That's right. That's right. Now, I want to show everybody your Instagram page here for the group as well, because you guys do a lot of direct action events. And this is what I was telling people. This is really where it's at, you guys. You see these politicians, they're not helping. They're not trying to change or fix these situations. And I would also add, let me stop sharing for a second. Where is P. Diddy in reference to what's happening to these buildings in Harlem? He's from there. Where are all these celebrities that are from that neighborhood? Why aren't they chipping in? Why aren't they saying something to Eric Adams? They have more power. They're celebrities. Where are they? They're nowhere to be found.
Exactly. And Jay-Z's trying to tell people at the Marcy projects to trade Bitcoin. That's his solution. He's got a Bitcoin Academy going there, which is a total joke. I mean, it's just absurd, the idea that, look, you can make the system work for you that Jay-Z's promoting. I mean, yeah, for a very small percentage of people, you can get ahead. But for the vast majority of people in the projects, things have gone from bad to worse over the last few decades while Jay-Z's become a billionaire.
That's right. And yes, I know some people may say, well, he grew up poor in the projects. Yes, he did, but he's rich now. And he's easily forgotten how hard and how difficult it was. Not everybody can become a famous rapper and get out. Yeah. So let me go ahead and share this again. Sorry. The Instagram page here for the UFAD. So this is where you can find their Instagram page. I do like the fact that you guys have like some of the rallies up here as well. Like there was a Boston rally here. Oh, I got to log in. I don't even remember my Instagram thing. Crap. There's a Boston rally here. One for Harlem teachers. There's a message here. Fred Hampton, the Revolutionary Black Panther. This is the kind of things that we need to be doing. Like we have to get this message out. Like people are being kicked out of their homes. People thought I was exaggerating when I said, no, they're still kicking people out even after that eviction moratorium.
Yeah. And the way they do it is most of the time they put so much pressure on people evict themselves. Because technically, if you go in front of a judge, you can't get evicted. But if they give you a notice telling you you've got to vacate, most people just pack up and go. Or if they start banging on your door every day telling you you've got to leave, unless people are organized, people often fold to the pressure, because it's not just the housing authority. These are some of the biggest and wealthiest, most powerful corporations in the world that are pushing this agenda, that are set to make billions of dollars off of this. In New York City, they just approved a thing promoted by the supposed socialist Julia Salazar, who's part of the DSA circles here, called the Housing Preservation Trust, which was promoted with Eric Adams and the CEO of NYCHA, which is nominally said it's going to help housing. But in fact, it opens the door to privatizing 25,000 apartments in New York City this year, with an option to privatize all of them next year. It is the exact same privatization scheme that Greg Rust used in Chicago when he ran the housing authority there. It's just been rebranded, and they tried to bring it here last year in 2021. They failed. They called it the Blueprint for Change. Then they had Julia Salazar be the lead sponsor, and a bunch of progressives, some well-meaning, some not so much in my view, rallied behind it to support it, calling it social housing, believing that this was going to make a difference, when in fact it's literally handing over the keys to housing or the deeds to housing to big corporations.
Yeah, and some of these terms like affordable housing doesn't necessarily mean that the housing is affordable for people. We were talking about that at Mayor Wu's rally as well. They all talk a good game. The politicians, they say they're going to invest. I've heard that through 3 different mayors here. I have not seen them increase affordable housing. I've seen them increase condos, though. They haven't stopped doing that. I want to show everyone your Twitter page here as well, because there was something that you guys put here. I'm actually in talks with Maya about this situation at Grant Manor. 2 years ago, Wingate companies claimed to increase rents at Grant Manor to cover repair costs. Although they have spent money on trivial things, no major repairs have been made. Issues persist, and high rents have forced a number of tenants out. And I want everybody to take a look at the rents here, because this is ridiculous. So basically, current Section 8 rents. Oh, I think I cut this off a little bit. Okay, current Section 8 rents here, and this is by bedroom. So if you have, I'm assuming this is studio, $1,056. The proposed rent is $2,350. That's an increase of $1,294. This is Section 8.
Yeah, and they said this was in the interest of the tenants because it would give them more money to make repairs, to do the community room over, etc. In fact, one prominent housing nonprofit in Boston met with the tenants and us and told us, oh, when this first was there, I was actually living in Boston when this rent increase was first proposed, and told everyone, you should take this. It's good for you. It's the best thing. How can a 122% rent increase be good for you? I mean, give me a break.
Exactly. And I can tell you guys, like, I'm looking at the proposed rents, like in Boston, like this is on par with non-Section 8 apartments. These prices, $3,900, $2,750, like this is insane.
Yeah. Yeah, and they said, oh, we'll give you a concession, we'll phase it in over 5 years. But people moved out right away because they knew they couldn't afford that. And if you're getting a $1,000+ rent increase, then even if it's phased over 5 years, you're still talking about your rent going up $200 a month every year, for 5 years consecutively. And then the conditions, if you got them up there, it's horrible. The elevators don't work. The roof is leaking. People's windows fall in on them. The heat's all messed up all the time. And management and security are harassing tenants. When I was there a few times when I lived in Boston, the security guards who are supposed to be there to protect the residents, but of course they don't, were harassing us, yelling at tenants all the time.
I'm trying to make my way out there. I'm in talks with Maya to speak to some of the residents there so they can show me around, because I saw these pictures and here it is, obviously a cheap way out. Instead of actually fixing the problem, they're putting down these little white pads. And then if you go to the next picture here, for those who are not aware, these holes that you see here in the ground on the property, those are rat holes. So that means that at somewhere on this property, there is a rat infestation. They have the holes there. So according to this, they're using bricks to like cover it up. That's not going to do anything. Literally the whole property, based on what I've seen from these pictures, it needs a rehaul. And then on top of that, one of the things that I told Maya is the way that they can kind of get around this if the landlords are not doing what they're supposed to do with the property, because like I said, people don't care about the poor, is to contact the fire department and find out if they have done any fire inspections on that property within the past year, because in Boston, you have to do fire inspections every year. So what you do, you contact the fire department, you get them to come out to do a fire inspection. So you may not be able to get them on these issues right here, but you could get them on other things like faulty wiring, or they could say that such and such, this is a fire hazard. That's a way to get around it if the landlords aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And then there's another picture here. And what is this, mold?
Yeah, the water damage. I mean, at Grant Manor, as in almost every project I've been in, and I've gone around the country to different areas we've been organizing and seen them, mold is the norm. I mean, that's why there's such disproportionate rates of asthma in the projects, because kids grow up their whole life breathing in mold. And the solution at Grant Manor, as in places in Harlem, as in all over, is paint over it. But if it's a wet, soggy ceiling full of mold and you put a new coat of paint, what, you got a week before it comes back through? It's not a solution.
Yeah, this is a common thing I've been noticing too. a lot of these landlords, they don't want to, the slumlords, I'm gonna call them that. They don't want to deal with mold issues, because if you have a mold issue, you really need to go inside the walls, and that's costly, and they don't want to pay for it. So they'll do exactly what this picture shows. They'll just paint over it so that it's not visible, but it's still there. And I'm glad you brought up the health issues as well, with kids having asthma in the projects as well. This is the thing about being poor in this country. You're more likely to have more health issues. You're more likely to have to deal with like these environmental issues, because people just don't care about poor people in this country. And this is exactly how they treat them. This is disgusting. Like, I don't understand. I still don't to this day how the city just lets them get away with this.
Yeah. Well, the city is run by and for developers, basically, and the landlords, you know. And I know you had Chris Hedges on recently, and I saw the whole episode. It was a great interview, and he was talking about the systematic racism, the nature of it, and he was talking about prisons. But I'd say what we see with housing is another example. I mean, because disproportionately in housing, it's Black and Latino people. And the level of neglect people have to deal with, the constant harassment, but especially the mold and other health issues. Like, Grant Manor's right by Mass Ave. When you cross north to south in Mass Ave, the life expectancy drops by 33 years. I mean, we're fear a quick death from violence, terrorism, whatever. And those things are scary, yeah. But what about how many people's lives are robbed from them? Years of people's lives, decades, by the racist discrimination in housing and across the board, stress, workplace, etc. I mean, we're not taught to be afraid of that or even think about it.
Here's another picture here too, where you can see the water damage. And this is not to say you will never have a water damage issue, regardless of where you live. But again, with this particular situation, they would need to go inside the wall, and they don't want to pay the money to do that.
And in this building, they just got $30 million from HUD, in addition to the massive subsidies they provide, because that rent increase was justified by the claim that they would get 30 million. They re-signed what's called their HAP contract with HUD in 2020. And so when that happened, HUD gave them $30 million when they did what's called a markup to market rent and rent increase. And so they got $30 million. They got massive increased monthly subsidies, and they were supposed to then do basic repairs to the building. 2 years in, numerous complaints, numerous contacts of HUD, Boston Housing, all the politicians, nothing. A few politicians sent people out for a little photo op, especially during the mayoral race. Kim Janey came out once. But as far as even writing a letter, really putting pressure in any way, none of them delivered in any regard.
Here's cracks in between the walls here. This is on the 7th floor. See, this is structurally, this building is not sound. But what they'll do is they'll kick them out, and then they'll sell it to developers, and they'll tear it down and make it into something nice and fancy and, for the wealthier people to live in, but they won't let poor people have that same opportunity. They want them to live in the filth. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's common. I mean, at the Mary Ellen McCormick projects in South Boston, when I was in Boston, I was talking to a tenant who lived there, and he was telling me the stairs were so bad there. I was going through, and he was showing me, and an old woman, he was saying, fell through the stairs and died a few years before. That's not, those sort of things aren't uncommon. That there's such structural neglect. I mean, in Manhattanville, I went in someone's apartment the other day, and the entire closet, there was no wall. It was a hole. And there was just a sheet of plastic they had put up themselves because housing wouldn't do anything. And behind that was the most horrifying wall of mold into like the substructure, or whatever the substructure, the walls, whatever, behind the walls in the building. And for years, NYCHA, the housing authority here in New York City, has known about this. Work orders have been filed. They've done nothing. I mean, this is like an entire, behind the walls, every square inch covered with black mold, toxic aspergillus fungus that kills people, and nothing's being done. And it shows the neglect. And this is not an accident. HUD and the federal government, both parties support privatization 100%. There's no dissent on this. It's bipartisan consensus. And so they have refused to make basic work orders. I've talked to the workers who work for the housing authorities in Boston, San Francisco, Oakland, and New York, and they all tell me the same thing. They do not give us the funds or the means to make the repairs. Our managers tell us, go do a spot repair and close the ticket that's filed for the work order. Because the plan is to let things rot until tenants become so desperate they accept the privatization schemes, believing that that'll be in their interests, and then they get forced out of their apartment.
That's right. That's exactly what the plan is, not to actually make significant improvements, because they're trying to push them out, and people do it in different ways. Thank you for the super chat, Devotion Orange. Property management companies are also corrupt. Agreed. And there's a question for you here from Roger Meadows. Thanks for the super chat. I know Salazar. What do you think of good cause eviction? Are you familiar with that, Ryan?
A little bit. I know it didn't pass. Salazar made a big thing she's in the state legislature in New York State of kind of fighting for good cause eviction, but it didn't pass. I mean, passing a basic law that limits the ability of landlords to evict is a good thing, I think. It doesn't go far enough, but it could be a real step in the right direction. But I don't know so much of the details. I do know it didn't end up passing. But the thing that Salazar did support, which did pass, was this privatization, housing preservation trust thing.
All right, Ryan, before you go, how can people get involved in what you do? How can people help?
Yeah, well, contact us on social media. We have our website, theufad.org. People can check out that, email us through our contact info there. If you're in a city we're organizing in, reach out. We'd love to work with you. If you want to get a chapter started in your city, if you just want to learn more about what's going on with privatization, reach out. We have a bunch of information on our website, newsletters, flyers, etc. And look, this is not going to be stopped in one or two developments or one or two cities. This has to be a national movement. Several million people live in public housing. So, and that's the tip of the iceberg. We're a tenant organization fighting around other issues too.
That's right. That's right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you for educating our viewers. Guys, please take this information with you and pass it on to friends and colleagues and family members, because something does need to be done about this, because it could it could be your town next.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me, Sabby. It was really great to join you tonight.
Thanks. Bye. All right, guys. It's not easy hearing about those things, but we need to know. You need to hear about it. You need to know what's happening to people out there. You need to know why these neighborhoods are being gentrified, why people are being pushed out, how they're being pushed out. And so when I hear that saying from people where they say, you need to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. No. No, like, can you pull yourself up by the bootstraps with this type of situation? No, you can't. So, but thanks so much, guys. I'm going to go through some of the comments and then I'm going to head out. Gamer says, thanks for having Ryan on, Sabby. Thank you so much, Gamer. Lady Alex M said, I've known about this for decades. Yeah, it's a problem. And like I said, it's just getting steadily worse, like over time. VS Adams, thank you, Sabby. You are welcome. And very good point here, Mario Vargas. The only language capitalism knows is violence historically. Well said. Well said. All right, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I will be live on my channel tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to talk the more housing issues. But a report did come out, and I got to thank Roger Meadows for this, because he sent me that report about the cost of living in the United States. This is the new update. So I'm going to talk about that along with this whole situation with Andrew Yang's new party. How do you guys feel about that? There's a poll there for you to fill out. So please do that. And we're also going to talk about Democrats trying to push forward Pete Buttigieg. So lots to talk about tonight. Call-in show will be at 9:45. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And again, pass this on to as many people as possible. All right. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.